Welcome to Lectionary Call-In for Tuesday, June 15th of 2021, where two laypersons, a pastor and an academician, gather for about 50 minutes each week to discuss the Gospel Lectionary for the coming Sunday, and this Sunday is June 20th. Each Tuesday we call in from wherever we may be at 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time, and for our good friend Charles Willard in Minnesota, that's 5:30 a.m. Our little team is working to be faithful to Lectionary Year B, and we hope this discussion will provide areas of focus and reflection. Here's how it works. We develop perspectives independently after the leadoff person shares some formative questions, and then in this virtual discussion room, we share, encourage, and challenge each other. And here are the folks joining us in today's discussion.
Sarah Mickelson. I'm calling in from Tampa.
Bill Hall from St. Petersburg, Florida.
Charles Willard, Medina, Minnesota.
I'm Don Upton, and I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the lectionary, Gospel Lectionary for this coming Sunday is Mark 4:35 through 41. And I'm going to be reading from the New Revised Standard Version. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. And he said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" And that's the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Well, always look forward to this coming up on our 3-year cycle. And it's not the only time in Mark where we see Jesus dealing with the waters, the sea. And I've got 3 questions to frame the discussion today. And the first one, Sarah Mickelson, heads up, is coming at you. And it's, what are your perspectives on Jesus setting the course to the other side only to be met by a furious storm at sea? Jesus sets the course to the other side, and the Christ and those who follow him are met by a furious storm at sea. Sarah?
Well, I pondered about this. He says, "Let us go to the other side," and he, exhausted from this very long day of preaching and healing and lavishing care and concern and empathy on the crowds, sounds like he gets into a boat, one of several, and falls asleep. So they take him just as he was, asleep, and head out toward the other shore. It crossed my mind that I thought more about the storm being metaphorical than I did real. And I want to acknowledge that storms at sea are terrifying. My husband and I were becalmed. No, I shouldn't say becalmed. We were stuck in a lightning storm between Sanibel Island and the mainland on a catamaran, a 16-foot Hobie Cat, which had a lightning rod right in the middle of it called the mast. And when we got stuck there, it was just us on the boat, and it was kind of scary. And it was like, how close can you get to the water? Get on the pontoons. So we laid on the pontoons, we dropped the mast, and we rode the storm out in a section of the mangroves that was, I should say, a place where every lost fishing hook and line landed. So I'm looking up, and there's like hundreds or 150, 200,000, it seemed like, fishing hooks that had little bits of something on them, dried up and nasty, rusty, and we're bobbing up and down violently in this mangrove laden with fish hooks. And the lightning is popping, and I'm thinking to myself, this would be terrifying in a boat crossing in the middle of the ocean, the middle of the sea, and how difficult it would seem for the disciples. So my brain jumped straight from that into the boat with Jesus, and I'm thinking of this conversation, and I thought about the language that's used. Let us go across to the other side. We're going to leave the Jewish side of the lake. We're going to head across to a more Gentile portion of the lake. And these disciples are leaving behind family, comfort, familiarity, ideas that they're comfortable with, and they're moving toward a section of the lake that is different completely from them. So I thought about the other side, and might the storm represent this mixture of fear and anxiety about leaving home and all that they know to follow Christ to the land opposite from all things familiar to them. And the chaotic sea, and I just thought to myself, we often think of this as a way of representing the world without Christ. This chaos, this maelstrom of unpredictability, and that Christ is the counter to that chaos. Thanks, Will Wellman, for pointing that out yesterday from Followers of the Way, a podcast that precedes us on Monday. And that here we are confronting the chaos of reality, and that Christ's contrast to that is presenting us with something altogether different. So I thought about the storm being somehow more frightening than less, and I thought about the disciples waking Jesus up, going, "Aren't you afraid? We're going to perish. Why are you sleeping?" And I thought about how often we are like that in our real lives when we encounter something that is so foreign to us, and it is our nature to repel or run from or just be terrified by all that is not what we thought it would be or all that is unfamiliar. And so I'm thinking about this perspective of Jesus setting the course. They're following him. They're in a boat. It's not like you can get off the boat in the middle of the storm voluntarily. And so they're met with this furious storm, and it's a good example of what reality looks like for so many people. And this book was written just after the fall of the temple in Jerusalem, and I think people would understand this sensation of being terrified of new, terrified of unknown, terrified of all that we knew is gone. So I think that this is a really good metaphor for everyone. In addition to that, we all have at least some storm story that we could fall back on. Sorry, long answer.
Thank you. Well, I have a note, Sarah, in my text from probably over 10 years ago from Bill Wallach, who used to teach the lectionary class at Palmacia Presbyterian Church, a place where the four of us actually were able to meet and who sponsors this. And there's a big note in this section from Bill that says, C equals represents overwhelming forces. Thank you, Bill. Bill Hull, what do you think?
I didn't hear the last word of the Bill Wallach quote. Overwhelming what, Don?
Right. Remember, the C represents overwhelming forces.
Forces. Okay, gotcha. My meditation and study led in, I think, the same direction that Sarah did. So I will just briefly build on her foundation. According to my study of Mark, and we remember that Mark begins with Jesus as an adult. It leaves out the birth narrative. So it begins with Jesus in Jewish territory in Galilee. Unless I'm overlooking something, this is the first reference in Mark to Jesus going somewhere other than an identified predominantly Jewish area. Now, somebody may have other information, but that's my read of Mark. So, and I think Sarah has already said this, this is itself even without the storm, that would have been a signal to the readers that something really different is about to happen. And interestingly, and John Debevoise noted this yesterday on Followers of the Way, and I'll admit I'd read over this before. In the second part of verse 36, other boats were with him. Now they disappear in the story. That's another confounding element to this, Don. You'd think it would be noted, and by the way, all the other people were saved too, but there's no other mention. And there's always the risk of making too much of it. Not only are the disciples in the boat being taken to a foreign area, other people are following. You know, maybe just out of curiosity, maybe they don't really know where they're going, whatever. But I think that is somewhat symbolic that almost in spite of ourselves, at times, Jesus leads us into foreign territory. Now, again, one can make too much of that, but at least it is noted that others are simply going where Jesus is and assumedly not really knowing where that's going to land them. Now, I emphasize this because this issue of the Gentiles extended beyond the earthly life of Jesus. Acts chapter 15, the council over do we require Gentile believers to be circumcised? And I would say that issue of do we set the boundaries, do we set the rules is a prevalent one today. One simple illustration, the ordination of women as ministers and officers is still a live issue for many today who think that they can set the boundaries. So I think it, and I'll say more about this in your other questions, and I think I'm echoing Sarah, there is a lot more at work here than appears just on the literal surface. I think Mark is inviting us into a deeper understanding of the gospel that's greater than the narrative itself might suggest.
Thank you. When I was reading this cycle, I was thinking about how we try to mentor and train up each other and our children and our grandchildren to understand that there are obstacles along the way, obstacles and disturbances along the way. This is a big one. This goes into the realm of real chaos or overwhelming forces, but most stories and journeys in literature have the obstacles. It's actually what makes for a story or a plot. You could do Ulysses trying to get home to Ithaca, obstacle after obstacle. You could do Jack London's, just, his stories where you're just trying to survive the night, dealing with nature. But there's something very different about this one. So there's the familiar about the overwhelming obstacles along the way, and then there's something bigger. And along the way, I wrote down a list of things that would be in every story, and I realized they're in the Jesus story too. Lost time, storms, conflict, misunderstandings, lots of confusion, misunderstandings that slow things down, hunger, violence, imprisonment. I go on, but it just goes right into the gospel story as people are following Jesus through his ministry. All those obstacles are there. So in that way, it fits into any literature. And then there's that one big exception, which is Jesus wipes the disturbance off the map. So there's the big break. He clears the way completely and wipes the disturbance off. I would say that probably makes it bad literature. It messes up the plot and all the conflict. He just clears the way. Of course, that's the reminder. We're dealing with the Christ being revealed every step through Mark. It's the first time I've read Mark as a series of Advent stories. Every miracle, every step, every clearing the way that they're learning at this, who Jesus really is as they go. And then I was reading N.T. Wright, and he uses this to start a conversation about here and obstacles along the way. Jairus, for example, the women at the tomb, and he just sums it up by saying, and he's connecting to the women at the tomb. Anywhere that you see fear, he says, they may pass from our sight at 16:8, saying nothing to anyone because trembling and panic had seized them. And he's connecting that to being on the boat. But if multiple forward references from chapter 5 find any fulfillment, we must assume that Mark does not intend to leave them in that condition any more than Jesus left either the woman or Jairus in their state of field or any other on that list. And I just thought it was a sweet note that says he does not intend to leave them in that condition. Charles, how about you? Any thoughts on the obstacles along the way?
I had a couple of observations. I'll put them that way. I'm not sure where one might go with this, but I just wanted to call them to your attention. You've already noted, I think it was Bill may have been the one that did this, that the comment about other boats were with them, or with him, but these other boats disappear from the narrative. They're just mentioned at that point, and it seems like a strange thing to do. I want to make the observation that if you look at Matthew and Luke, their way of dealing with that puzzle is simply to leave it out. So you don't have other boats being with them in Matthew and Luke, and I don't go further with that except to say that in their presentation of the scene didn't require that. It may have been a puzzle to them, and so their way of, I'm suggesting that their way, this is reading things into something that is simply there. Their way of dealing with that puzzle is simply to eliminate the piece that created the problem. So they left out this comment about other boats. The other boats aren't there, so you don't have to worry about the other boats in Matthew and Luke because they aren't there, even though they are in Mark, who simply mentions them, but then there's no further mention of them. The other comment was having to do with Jesus and his the way it is described in Mark, where Jesus, there are actually two comments leading on that. One is in 36. They took him, Jesus, with them in the boat just as he was. What does that mean? What does that mean? And I have no answer for that except that that's and then because then further on down, this comes from another one of the readings that I did in verse 38. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. So is Mark trying to describe the circumstance under which Jesus went to sleep instead of staying awake and being with the others in the boat as they were maneuvering the boat just to make sure that it was out and it was being moved by the wind in the direction in which they wanted to be moved. And then, but again, Matthew and Luke deal with that by simply leaving out those little phrases. There are little side comments about Jesus' condition, or where he was, or why he was, or what he did. My larger question is this, and again, it's a puzzle to which I have no answer, but it's a puzzle. What would have happened? What would have happened if they hadn't waked up Jesus? And would the boat have sunk? Would they all have drowned except for Jesus, or maybe Jesus? It's not. It isn't clear to me what. I think my own sort of picture of foreordination and free will is, and I think I'm too old to be thrown out as a heretic, but it's possible. So here goes. I believe, my sense is that we have all kinds of options in life and choices to make. And some are better choices and some are worse choices. The Lord has a way for us to be. And the Lord's will is going to prevail in spite of us, but also recognizing our free will to make decisions. And so we make decisions, and these decisions are sometimes good decisions or bad decisions. The Lord is his capacity doesn't make us make a particular decision, but it accommodates that. And if his plan is that we're going to get to a certain place, i.e., from this side of the shore to the other side of the shore, he's going to get us there. And if our decision is to do it in the way that the disciples did it, or to do it in some other way, it follows and corrects and makes adjustments for our inappropriate decisions and multiplies our positive decisions. Maybe that's the last is an overstatement, so I'll leave it where it is. But I think it for me it was useful speculation. Well, what would have happened if the disciples hadn't gone and waked Jesus up? Would he have waked up when the water came finally to his place on the ship and then done something about it? But the Lord provided for the decision that the disciples made. The last comment I'm going to make has to do with, I think this comes from, I picked this up from Mark Davis. In verse 38, he was asleep on the cushion, and they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Pronoun "we." You think, and there's no way to say. The text doesn't yield that. The grammar doesn't yield that. But the question that Mark Davis raised, and so I now raise to you all, is we. When the disciples said we are perishing, are they talking about us? That is, we disciples, worried about their own lives, or is there we all-encompassing? Does that encompass Jesus too? And I don't have a good answer to that question. My guess is that at that point of agitation and worry and unease and fright and fear, that the disciples' anxiety grew out of their own personal anxiety. So they weren't being inclusive at that point. In fact, they were. I think that the we there was more specific. Don't you care about us, the disciples, not all of us, including you. And the last thing is, in verse 41, the word which is translated by the NRSV as awe. They were filled with great awe. Sarah Rudin in her translation, and others, but this is the one that I was relying on. Sarah Rudin in her translation of the New Testament, she translates that as fear. So they were filled with fear, and the fear now was shifted. The original fear that the disciples had, as it's recorded in this verse, the original fear was they were going to get done in. The end of life was at hand because the boat was going to break up, as boats often do in certain situations like this. In spite of their skill as fishermen, having faced this before, this is going to be the last time they were going to all down and drown. That was their fear. Now, at least as it's described, as this word has been translated by Sarah Rudin and others, she wasn't alone in this. Now, and it's amazing that the disciples, it's like, they still don't get it. Who is this? After all this time they spent with Jesus and all the miracles that they had seen, and now this one, instead of awe, which is the way it's translated here, it's not awe, it's fear. They're now worried. And it's not surprising that somebody who has this kind of power would be a scary person to be around. Thank you.
Thank you. And of course, he asked the questions about fear and faith after the fact. I think that's interesting. Your comments have my mind racing, Charles. I mean, one of them is is it fair to say this was never to be a story about a foundering boat and people in the water? It is not written as that story, and it was never going to be a story about people in the water, which says something about the mission. And I'm wondering also, is this, as you were talking, what's the difference between shaking Jesus, saying, get involved, save us, and a prayer? Isn't this a prayer too? Isn't this a cry, oh Lord, how long? Well, I'm going to get on to the next question, because you can see how all these are really tied together. And Bill Hull, this is for you. I'll make it personal. I'm still stunned and tossed about myself by the combined inquiries. Why are you afraid? And have you still no faith? Mark jams those two together as if the second question is the answer, or part of an exercise in logic. I don't believe that to be the case, but an exercise in logic like, if one has faith, then there is no fear. Therefore, if someone is afraid, then they must have no faith. And I'm wondering, how does Mark report in a way where there was no daylight between the two questions? Are we not to pause and answer question number one first? And there's this dual question that comes along after the calming, too. It doesn't take place until after it's done, not before. Bill Hull, what are your thoughts on these two questions jammed together like that?
I will note that the followers of the way wrestled with the same issue yesterday, so you have time, go and hear that their acknowledgement of the puzzlement. I think the tone and content of the wording of your question is appropriate. Stunned, tossed about. This is confounding, as you say, on the level of logic. And I think that it is so confounding is a signal by the writers of Mark, that there is a message on more than one level. I think we've already acknowledged that. Okay. In logic, it makes no sense. What reasonable person would not be frightened? Now, respecting time, I want to read some quotes from Mark Davis, an article that he wrote about this passage entitled The Politics of Scripture. And this is so well written, I think it helps us not move too quickly to the calm, but to live a bit in the boat when they're trying to wake Jesus. Great bodies of water represented life and livelihood as well as ever-present danger. Everybody knew somebody who had set out to sail one day but never returned. Everybody knew the deadly potential of a sudden wind or heavy storm. And everybody lived with the risk of such danger because the waters were the resources for work, food, portage, import, and export, ancient and modern, fresh and salt, inland and coastal, large bodies and small. The waters are ambiguous as gift and nemesis. And he goes on to build on that, how this experience represented life. And he says, this is chaos. Everything is caught up in it. Nothing is secure. And those tools or practices that usually allow us to exploit the elements to our advantage are now rendered useless or worse. People in chaos are not in control. And again, to refer to the followers of the way, they link it to the two preceding parables, which we looked at last week. The growing seed, you plant it, you leave it alone, it grows of its own, and the mustard seed, which seems so insignificant. And they stressed, and I would, that the message can be perceived to be God is present and at work even when this is not evident. And again, for the sake of time, I'll hand the ball back to our quarterback.
Well, how about you, Sarah? What about these two questions, phrases jammed together?
Good point. Let me start there. If we all are just flotsam and jetsam until we encounter Christ, I think about the disciples encountering fear, and I thought about this question on does fear undermine faith? Does fear work counter to the goodness of God? And are the disciples in a condition of catastrophizing? And I'm thinking about how fear narrows your line of vision so you don't see the other boats, how fear undermines your ability to encounter the world in a real sense, so it amplifies the threat and the noise and increases perceived anxiety. And how many times does the gospel give us the language, fear not? And I thought about that. Maybe it's not the lack of calling, but a fear of responding. The fear of being inadequate, the terror of being overwhelmed, which is all presented to us in this story. Do I truly believe God knows what I need? And am I able to form that into words? And he knows even before I can do that. And here is Christ with us in the storm, the holy present in the chaos, which is kind of like taking something that's been completely out of focus and suddenly by adjusting your line of sight, things become clear. So I'm thinking about Mark Davis's note about, do you not care that we perish? And I'm thinking about, sure thing, you're the Christ. It's not going to bother you. You have complete control over it. The rest of us are going to die. So that moment of anxiety. After reading Mark Davis, I also read David Lose's article on miracles and change, and he asks the question, do you think the disciples were more frightened after the stilling of the storm or before? And I thought that was a brilliant thought. When you encounter the Creator in control of chaos, is it more frightening than chaos? And so I thought about this, the fear being encountered in the storm as a glimpse of what fear can do. And I'm thinking about Jesus using this as a device to increase the disciples' empathy and prepare them to meet Legion, who is going to be waiting on the shoreline when they get there. And I don't know about you, but external anxiety and internal anxiety for me hit the same buttons. They cause my palms to sweat. They cause my breathing to whack out. I suddenly have cotton mouth and I can't think clearly. And I'm thinking about panic attacks and moments where I've encountered what I would consider this kind of level of fear. And I'm thinking about what insight does that give us into encountering people who are living in that place 100% of the time. And then my last question is, many perceive it to be madness to follow Christ. And I'm thinking about how for many of us, it's the opposite of that. And I'm thinking about that good news and what that brings to the conversation in this particular question. So I'm going to leave it there. I have more questions than answers. Sorry.
Thank you. I've been trying to act this out almost out loud during this week. Have you no faith? And my answer today is, well, I do have faith. It just doesn't fit this fact situation. Yeah, of course, we all have faith, but that has nothing to do with the set of facts that we have right here. So let's get real. That'd be one of my answers. Why are you afraid? Before and after are shocking because I agree. Afterwards, I'm just as confused. It's almost chaotic to me after the fact as it was before, because the fact of a boat being swamped makes sense to me. What takes place after doesn't make sense to me at all. And so in Mark, we've got these little advents or, in a sense, big apocalypses that keep coming through. And the next question I'm going to have is about this. Who is this Jesus keeps rushing towards these people, and I think to us too. And sometimes it's shocking. And it goes back to this chapter wasn't written to have people in the water or the boat foundering. That's not what's going to happen here. And how it gets there is just a complete shock. I want to throw out that part of the faith may have to do with human-to-human relationships. And I forget that sometimes because it's always, I'm reading Mark in the context of the resurrection and the saving grace of Jesus Christ. And this is early in Mark, leader, person to person. Who is this person? So I think fear could also include, just do a quick list and line up this list with what we have learned about the Christ and what we think about the Christ. But if you're shaking Jesus and he's asleep, the fear, person to person, is this man is rudderless, right? He can't put an oar in the water. He is indecisive. He is, use today's language, he is asleep at the wheel. He is out of touch. He is uncommitted. My leader. Who is this now? Who is he now? He's uncommitted. He's passive. He's probably untested. Does he know how to be on a boat at all? He is unprepared. He is unworthy of our trust. We think today, worthy is the Lamb. He is unworthy. I think all these thoughts are rushing into their heads. He is a pretender. He is not our teacher. He is not. How could he be? He is a pretender. He is inexperienced. And so, put that in a left column and then look at what the filter we're looking through today in all the Gospels. And I think I'll put fear on that. My relationship with my colleague, I'm being let down. He's now revealing himself as who he truly is, which is untested, inexperienced. He doesn't even have his hand on the rudder. What kind of shock are we in for here as Jesus rushes in the next apocalypse as he comes in? So that list, person to person, helped me get down into that boat too. Charles, before we go on, what are your thoughts about these two questions that run together?
They're still running along. I'll wait until the third time.
Great. Well, I'll move on to the final one. And Sarah, I'll go back to you on this one. What are your thoughts about the disciples asking, already along the way at the sides of Jesus? They've been with him along, but they're asking, who then is this that even? I like that. Who is this that even? Or are there things we can learn about Christ and his ministry from this ongoing working out of who is this now? I'm putting some emphasis. Who is this now? Who is this now? Who is this now that we have this new information? Or I could flip it and go, and now, who is this in this chapter, in this very plot-oriented book of Mark? What are your thoughts about that, getting this question asked along the way?
It's a revealing. I have a paragraph, and this is all I have for this answer, because I just thought this was perfect for describing who we are. Perhaps we, like the disciples, are engaged in a process of continual discovery, uncovering morsels of truth that lead us to broader and deeper awareness that uncover yet a new path of inquiry. As we continue after the heart of God, only then do we arrive at the notion that we have barely tipped the iceberg of wonder and comprehension and are yet still on the precipice of understanding a mustard seed of all that God is prepared to share with us. I think this is one of those moments where they go, oh, you are not who we thought you were. And that is so cool on one hand, and that is so terrifying on the other. I think that this is before the walking on the water. This is before they see, what they would consider to be unexplainable things. Certainly they've seen healings. I think that the thought here for them is there is something altogether new here, something altogether different here than what we had first initially thought. And this is a moment of, we've left the harbor where we know everything, and we're landing in that place of everything is new. And I love that.
Thank you. Bill Hull, who is this now?
First of all, Sarah, and you know this from reading Mark Davis's translation, the original Greek, I think, helps underscore a part of what you were saying. In the original Greek, it says in verse 39, the wind ceased and a great calm began. In 41, the New Revised Standard Version says a great awe. No, it says they were now experiencing a great fear. There's a juxtaposing. There's complete calm, and the disciples are fearful. And to get back to the question you're focusing on in this question, Don, their fear is because they've been rescued. And again, Sarah said it well. It's they are confounded. They are afraid. And I think that's a common theme in the gospel. It's not just the religious leaders who do not understand who Jesus is. The disciples are constantly on a journey to grasp the meaning of what Jesus is teaching and doing. Where is it? Several places Jesus says, how long have I been with you, and you still do not understand? The disciples, not just the adversarial religious leaders, are questioning who Jesus is and how he's empowered. Now, again, to refer briefly to Mark Davis's article about this and the politics of this story, and Sarah, you've noted this is written after the destruction of the temple. Mark Davis says, for people in chaos, the political reading of this story may have been no less fanciful than the miraculous reading. They were in the diaspora, war-torn, terrorized community. The hope of this story is that the reign of God extends over even the most daunting expression of chaos. It presses our sensibilities and expectations, but it offers a hope that even the chaos can be brought to order. Several of the Old Testament readings for this week, 1 Samuel 17 is a David and Goliath story. Here's this little young shepherd up against this giant. And Job 38, where God is questioning Job, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? That whole struggle on a human level between our expectations and what God is doing. And I tried to sum it up this way. It seems clear to me that this story was offered not as a lesson based on human logic, but rather grounded in the assurance that God is present and at work in all things, especially referring to the political chaos when human ego, power hunger, and oppression are seemingly prevailing. And I think that's obviously a message for us today. In many ways, our world and our nation are in chaos, not just from the pandemic, but how it is managed, and whether or not working for the greater good is what really our elected leaders are about. So I think it's a relevant story for us today.
Thank you. I'm wondering if part of the chaos is, I'll make it personal, the power I have to create my own universe and reach conclusions about the people I surround myself with. And the temptation, I'm good at it. I can lock somebody in like that. I'll take a look at them. I'll know what they are in my life, who I want them to be. By just a few actions, I can sum them up. And, today, we have kind of a superficial view about who's who and who you're with, and the human, and maybe it's protective, but one of the human powers is that we can lock things in so quickly without really going on a journey at all or walking beside each other. And Jesus insists, he just keeps coming back. And again, and every time it's a shock, especially in Mark. Who is this? The comparison I'd make is, well, it happens to me all the time. I hear people say the words. Somebody will do something that's revealing. They'll say something, they'll do something they'll demonstrate a skill or something, and you may have done it. You go, well, who are you? Who is this? Look at you. Who is this person? And that's just a light view of this. But I would also say when I've seen people who just demonstrate, could be fortitude, defensiveness, teamwork in ways that are beyond all understanding. And I don't just go, who are you? It's like, I have no idea. I don't think I know him at all. And I think Christ just blows this out of the water because he really does blow it all out in this case. And if I can meditate on when I'm shocked by people who break through my stereotypes, which can be shocking and exciting in terms of self. It's like, what am I doing? Who do I think I am creating a universe and summing people up in ways? Am I receptive? And I think the disciples and followers of Christ, if you look at the letters, are experiencing that through the New Testament and the letters. It's like, part of what they're saying is the kind of the patience and the service and the neighborliness is to be open and receptive to the fact that that what we're doing for each other is a lot bigger in the gospel. And I keep coming back to, well, look at you. Who are you? That happens to me every day because I'm such a bonehead, locking people in. And then here's Jesus. And I'll wrap up by saying, I think what they were looking for from him, what they wanted, of course, they didn't get. They got something beyond all understanding. If they're looking for comfort or having somebody pitch in, that would be evasive. I think what they were looking for from the Christ, for this leader, for somebody to pitch in, for somebody maybe to give them comfort, that would have been evasive. Jesus could do nothing but wipe the weather clear. Nothing short of that. He was not going to be the human companion to give them comfort. That would have been evasive. That nothing short of the connection with the Creator, and the connection with creation was needed to wipe chaos off the map. Nothing short would have been okay under these circumstances. How about you, Charles? You get last word. What do you think?
I think I better remain silent.
Now, that's a sad thing. Well, thank you. It's been fun getting back to this story again. And Sarah, you made a great point. We're going to have Jesus on the water again real soon in Mark, just a few words away. For folks listening in, Palmacia Presbyterian Church is at 3501 West San Jose Street. That's in Tampa, Florida. And for more information, you can go to palmacia.org. That's PALMACEIA.org. And we commend that site to you because there are other discussions of the gospel lectionaries, more perspectives, more ideas if you're leading or moderating a class on how to get conversation going. You can also find great sermons at that site, prayers, reflections, and outstanding music. And you're always welcome, and we'll see you next time.